Hello. Hello, hello. Oh, you know what we're here for? We're here for the Multifamily Law School, but we are also, we already know what the topic is, which is wonderful. It's on assumptions. And I'm going to tell you the legality and things you need to do to protect yourself when you're doing an assumption. But before we get started, we must shout out to my brother Lenny. It's his birthday today. He's 72 years old. He looks amazing, absolutely amazing. So shout out to Lenny. Everybody say hello to Lenny. I will do that again as we start building this up. All right, let me start by let's talk about what are assumptions. Now, in the single family world, we don't call them assumptions. We call them subject to. You're taking over the property subject to the existing mortgage. Now, in the single family world, the subject twos are typically, everyone scares you into the DOS clause, a due on sale clause, which requires that if there's any transfer of ownership, the property, the lender will require you to sell the property because it's due. Any transfer of ownership will trigger the due on sale clause. Never happen. I can't say it never happens, but it's in the contract. It could happen, but people, because there's so many single family residentials, no way that these mortgage companies would be able to go around and keep track of all of them, especially with people dying and divorcing and what have you. But in the commercial side, it's a different world. In the commercial side, your lender. They come around to see you. They call you on the phone. They get reports from you every single month. So there's a much closer personal relationship between you and the commercial lender for a to never be able to just change ownership in a 30-day period. The lender says, "Oh, no, not so fast. We underwrote you and we gave the mortgage to you. You can't just go around and give it to someone else." So that's why you don't see the due on sale trigger clauses. What you see in the multifamily are assumptions. And that means that you're going to come in as the buyer and assume the existing mortgage, which means you're actually just stepping into the shoes of the current owner. So that is what an assumption is. Now, the question is, why do people do assumptions? Well, it's really done for two reasons. One is for the buyer and one is for the benefit of the seller. So as far as the buyer goes, the buyer will assume your mortgage if the interest rate that you currently have it at is a lot more beneficial to him than what the current rate would be if he were to go out to the market and get it. That is why today you are seeing a whole lot more of assumptions being done, because obviously if a guy's got a 3% interest rate, that is an asset to the deal. And so why not use it? So that is definitely why on the buyer side you use it. Now, why do you do it on the seller? What do you care? Well, obviously there's a huge disparity in the interest rates like there is now. It's going to help your property sell. That's a side note. But more importantly, one of the things about these multifamily properties, depending upon which type of lending you're using, there could be a huge prepayment penalty. Now, we don't call them prepayment penalties. We call them yield maintenance or defeasance. It's a whole big formula. I'm not going to dig down deep into it, but essentially what it means is, hey, the bank was expecting to make X number of dollars off of your mortgage. If you cancel that mortgage early, they're going to lose all that money and they need to make up for it somehow. And the way they do it is by charging a yield maintenance or a defeasance on the mortgage. That's why the seller doesn't want to have to pay that. It can get pretty pricey. And so he wants out. The seller wants out, but he doesn't want to have to pay that prepayment penalty. And that's why one of the reasons is when you're looking to do an assumption, you first have to understand how much time left do you have on that deal. If you only have 18 months left in the term of that mortgage, don't do the assumption. Just don't do it. As soon as you get in there and you're operating the property during the honeymoon period is over, and now you got to go out and find yourself more financing. Don't do that. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Molly. Wish my brother a happy birthday. So that is those are some of the reasons why the buyers like the assumptions and the sellers like them too. You know, a few years ago, three or so years ago, you would never see an assumption. It just didn't happen because interest rates are practically zero. But now, obviously, you know, if you have a 3% mortgage and the loan allows for an assumption, many local banks, they want to rewrite the loan at the 6% interest rate, so they're not going to let an assumption happen. But when you're doing, especially with a government-sponsored program, a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac loan, you're always going to see that that assumption. Let me see another thing that I just realized that we need to take into consideration with an assumption is remember, when you're looking at a new loan, your loan is always going to be sized based upon the purchase price of the property. You know what I mean? Loan to value, 80% loan to value, 75% loan to value. How do we know how much that loan is going to be? Well, it's based upon a percentage of the purchase price. When you're dealing with an assumption, that's not what happens. The principal amount of the mortgage is set in stone. It's set. You don't change it. So what happens in that case is if the sales price of the property is in huge disparity to the outstanding loan, well, why would you do the deal? Here's what I mean. Let's say the mortgage is, let's say the purchase price of the property is $100,000, and you are going to do a new money loan, a new money purchase loan, and you're going to do 80% of that $100,000. That means you have to show up to the table with 20% down. And when you use that 20% down, that number is going to be used in all your calculations for your cash on cash return, for your IRR. So the lower the number, probably the better your returns are going to look. And now along comes a guy that says, I want to sell you my property for $100,000, but you have to assume my existing mortgage. And you say, well, how much is your existing mortgage? It's only $50,000. Well, that means to get to the next level, you're going to have to come up with $50,000 down in order to fill the gap between the assumptive loan and the purchase price. So that's going to kill your cash on cash return. So why are these assumption loans so beneficial? Well, what happens is that's what used to happen all the time. When I first got started in the business, that was the biggest problem with assumptions. You had this huge disparity and it would kill the deal. So that meant that the seller had to get rid of his property pretty early on in his ownership. If he held on to it too long and the price continued to grow, he would never get to that. He would never find an investor who would want to invest in his deal. And so that was screwing up a lot of these Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans. So in all their infinite wisdom, they came out with what I call supplemental loans. Back when I first got started, we hadn't come up with a catchy name of supplemental loans. We called it ratcheting up the loan. Honestly, that's what we call it, ratcheting up. You're going to ratchet up the loan. So what happens now is if you have that type of a huge disparity, you can go back to the current bank and say, hey, I want a supplemental loan that brings me up to an 80% loan to value, and therefore I only have to put 20% down. So essentially what you're getting are two loans, the base loan, the original loan, and then a supplemental loan at whatever interest rate is currently being offered. And you have those two loans together, and you have those two loans together, and that gets you to the 80%. So that is how we kind of do it today with the supplemental loans. That's how we solve the problem of the loan amount being less than 80% loan to value. So that's that solution. Now, what are the pitfalls? What I want you to do, if you're buying an assumption, if you're getting into it, I want you to think about it this way. you are doing the seller a huge favor by assuming his existing loan. Now, yeah, I understand that the interest rates can make a big play, but there are other ways you can get screwed with an assumption. There are many pitfalls with an assumption that you should be going up to the seller. Oh, really? I got to assume your mortgage? Oh, yeah, that's a good interest rate. But man, what about this and this and this and this, which we will cover right now? And so in this particular case, I always want you to approach assumptions like you're doing the seller a huge favor. He's not doing you any favors. He's lucky to have you. And make sure you think about that when you're doing the negotiations. Okay, so let's talk about the pitfalls of assumptions. And this is where you get yourself into trouble. First off, I want you to understand that when you're dealing with an assumption and you're doing the negotiations, there's always a third person at the negotiating table, and it's the bank. And if the bank doesn't like the deal that you and the seller have, he can come in here and put the kibosh on it, and then you're all out. All right? So I'm going to tell you about the pitfalls of an assumption by telling you a story. I like stories. Okay. That was my Simpson imitation. Molly, was that a good Simpson imitation? I like stories. Bert Simpson. Is that his name? Bart Simpson? Bart Simpson. Let's see if Molly liked it. All right, here we go. So I find this deal down in Texas. Good sized property. We could take it down. It's nice looking. It was okay property. Ended up being an absolute dog. But it was an assumption. If I was going to buy this property, I would have to assume the existing mortgage. Well, I negotiated hard on this property, and I thought, yeah, the price is too low and all this other stuff. I negotiated a purchase price such that, let's say it was perfect. Thank you. Let's say the purchase price of my property was, the guy was asking $100,000, and you had to assume the existing mortgage. The mortgage amount was $80,000. And I said, Homer Simpson. That's right. That's who it was. Thank you, Alan. I like stories. That's Homer Simpson. Come on, Molly. Oh, Alan just showed you up. All right. So $100,000 purchase price, $80,000 existing mortgage that I have to assume. I didn't like the $100,000 price, so I negotiated it down. I drove a hard bargain. And I got it under contract for $92,000. Okay? That meant for me to close this deal, I only had to come up with $12,000, 12% of the purchase price. I didn't have to come up with 20% down. I was such a good negotiator. I got it so that I only had to bring 12% to the table. Okay. Now, remember what I said. There are three people at the negotiating table. The third one is the bank, and they could put the kibosh on anything. And the other thing, too, is if you read the mortgage document, it clearly states that in the event of an assumption, the bank can only say yes or no to the buyer. They can't change any economic terms, period. Clearly states that in the contract. All right? So let me just pull this up. Okay. So here's what happened. And this can happen to you. I'm going to take you right through the whole acquisition process as it became known. First thing that happened was after 60 days of waiting, we get approved by the bank. Lordy, now we're going to buy this property. But the bank says, well, not so fast. You see, we see that you're only putting 12% down. And I say, well, yes, I am. Congratulations. Well, we don't like that. We like our owners to have more skin in the game than 12%. So for us to approve this mortgage, you need to come up with an additional 8%. Now, first off, just think about that from a deal structure standpoint. I'm buying this for $92,000. They're telling me I've got to essentially buy it for $100,000. But I have a contract with the seller where he's only going to get 92,000 from me. Where does that other 8,000 go? Whose pocket does that go to? Well, the bank said, we're glad you asked. That's a great question, Mr. Dobbins. You are very savvy at this business. Let me tell you where you're going to put that $8,000. Oh, and by the way, did we tell you that we're a bank? And yes, you're going to put it in the form of a letter of credit into our bank. And you can't touch it, and you can't put your hands on it. You can't use it for replacement reserve. You can't do anything with it for the life of this loan. So that means I take 8% of the purchase price of the property and I set it aside in a bank that it gets peanuts of interest, and it just sits there, and my investors get no benefit from it. They get to invest in my deal, but 8% of everything that they've given me, or not, 8% of the purchase price goes to, actually it's going to be, it was almost 50% of what they gave me goes to sitting in a bank account with no return on it whatsoever. And then I said, wait a minute, that's not right. I've read your documents. Your documents clearly state that you cannot do this. You are adding additional economic terms to this mortgage, and you're not allowed to do that. So no, you can't do that. Well, then you're not approved for the mortgage. Yes, I am, because the mortgage says you either approve me or you decline me. You didn't decline me. You approved me. Yes, and congratulations. And it went around and around and around, and it just, the guy who has the gold makes the rules. I had to sit there and take it because my money, my earnest money of $75,000, obviously the purchase price and everything made up numbers, $75,000 had gone hard, and I couldn't do anything about it. I either closed on it or I lost that money. All right. At the end of the day, I was better off losing the money. So, but here's the thing. That's what happens with the changing of additional economic terms. You're dealing with a bank. A bank has never seen a contract they can't rewrite. So just understand that where you're going in. I'm going to tell you how to solve that problem at the end of this lesson. The next thing that happened was the reserve replacement. Now, folks, listen to this. So when you take out a Fannie or a Freddie, you have to set aside, typically right now under today's conditions, I think it's about $300 per unit per year into a separate account held by the bank as a replacement reserve, we call it. You have to use it for capital expenditures. Okay. What happens to that money upon the sale of the property or upon an assumption of the property? If nothing else is spoken, that money goes with the seller. It's really the seller's money. It's money that they accumulated over time, and they just decided they're not going to put a dime into this property. Let the money just build up. So what happens at the closing table for a sale? Well, obviously the bank has to clean out its escrows. It gets rid of all its money, and it gives the seller the money. But with an assumption, it's a cross between a sale and an assumption, a sale and a continued ownership. What happens is, and this happened to me, 5 days before the bank is about to close on our loan, we get the sources and uses. And there's a line item on there for $70,000. And we're like, wait a minute, what's this $70,000 replacement here? Replacement reserve. Oh, that's the money that the seller has on account with us that we're going to be giving him at the closing. Okay, but I'm new. I haven't even built up a reserve. Why would you need me to do that? Oh, no. That's really essentially our money until we tell you it's not our money anymore. That's money that you and the seller have been setting aside to protect our collateral, to rebuild our property if there's anything wrong with it. And once he quits, the money goes with him. And now you step into his shoes and you have to replace the replacement reserve. You have to bring to the table $70,000. Remember what I said at the beginning. you are doing the seller a huge favor, because if you were not doing an assumption, you would be doing a new money purchase mortgage, and you wouldn't be stepping to the table with $70,000. Not a chance. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But when you're doing an assumption, you're replacing that money. And that's just the way it works. I'll tell you at the end how to protect yourself. Okay, now the third thing that happens is you've now got a third person at the table who's already got a law firm working on his behalf. So he hires that law firm and sends you the bill. So you've got your lawyer, seller's got his lawyer, the bank's got their lawyer, and that bank's lawyer doesn't care. He can charge you whatever he wants. If it was you getting the mortgage, you already know what your closing costs are. You already know what what your closing cost fees for legal will be. They tell you that up front, and there's a good chance you've already paid much of it with your application fee. But in this particular case, they're the ones who are setting the closing cost expenses. And every lawyer at the table for that deal that I was closing was shocked at what the Fannie Mae lawyer, outside counsel, charged to do the closing. It was highway robbery, but I had no say. There was nothing I could do whatsoever about this outrageous expense. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so that's why I'm here to teach you the ways to protect yourself from those three pitfalls. So let's talk again about the first one. First one is a replacement reserve. Remember, you show up at the table and they say, hey, you owe us $70,000. What do you mean? Okay, that money, while it's with the bank, can only be used to cover capital expenditures. So it has to be spent on the property. The reason why it isn't being spent, or the reason why it even exists, is because while the seller owned that property, he just went out there and banked the money, didn't put the dime back into the asset. So the way you protect yourself is in your letter of intent. And now that all of this wording has to be put in the letter of intent, because if it shows up in the purchase and sale, you're too late. You've got to put these things on the table on day one for an assumption. You're going to have wording in your letter of intent that says, if the seller has any replacement reserve money, he either has to spend it down to zero before the closing, which means he's got to go spend it on the property, which means you're going to get your property fixed up a little bit because you're making him use the money. Or in the alternative, that bank gets transferred over to the seller, or to the buyer, to you. You get that money in a bank at closing. So at the closing table, you don't have to come up with any more money. It's already there. And the seller, what actually happens in that case, think about it, is if the seller wants to sell his property for $100,000 and he's got $10,000 sitting in a bank account, and at the closing table, you've now got to come up with an extra 10, and he walks away with 10, that property didn't cost $100,000, did it? It cost 110. Now, I've had some arguments with some neophytes in this business, and I said, what about the replacement reserve? Oh, it's only $40,000. Only $40,000? Really? Yeah, sure. As long as it's not your money, it's your investor's money. But that's the way. You got to either spend it down to zero or have him transfer the money to you at the closing table. Remember, you're doing him a huge favor. If you had to go out there and buy this property and make him pay the penalties, the prepayment penalties, he would be hurting. But now he's happy as a clam because you're going to be paying the reserve replacement. He gets a nice check. That's how you protect yourself. Now, the other way you protect yourself, as far as it goes with changing the economic terms, is you get to put into the letter of intent a statement that says, at any time that the agreement is in effect, that you decide, or that the bank changes any of the economic terms, you and the seller will work together towards renegotiating the deal. And if you can't renegotiate at any time, you can walk from the deal and get your earnest money back. I wished I had had that type of wording in my contract, because that would have protected me. So make sure you have that type of wording in there. And the third and final thing is limit the closing costs. Put a flat number on there, $10,000, $20,000, saying the most I will pay to close this assumption is $20,000, because if I was getting it from my broker, he would be charging me $20,000. I don't want your law firm from Fannie Mae sending me a bill for $50,000. So they may send the bill for 50, but if they are, I'm only paying 20 of it, and the seller is going to pay the difference. So that's how you protect yourself in an assumption every step of the way. All right. So that is, let me just check. Pitfall. Let me see. I think I got everything. Okay, low man. Oh yeah. Oh, and the last thing is nobody at the bank likes to do assumptions. You get to put it at the bottom of the pile, because all they care about is generating new revenue, generating new money. Now, granted, you're going to pay a 1% acquisition, but not acquisition, but a assumption fee. But everybody, goes right down the bottom of the pile. So that's why you always get the short shrift when it comes to the loan officer's time. All right. So to clarify, let's see. I'm going to do Let's see. All right, Alan, let's see what you got for me. To clarify, regarding the Texas property, were you dealing with two different lenders? No. But no. There was no new financing to be assumed. Everything was done on an assumption, Alan. I think what maybe you're getting mixed up, because I talked about the supplemental loan. The supplemental loan is not done by another lender. That's always done by the current lender. They just add it to the existing mortgage. And it's essentially, like I said, it's a second mortgage, but it sits on top of the other mortgage. So no, whenever you're doing an assumption, you're only dealing with one lender. That's really how it works. So yeah, that's it. Any other questions? Hey, just one last thing. Happy birthday, Lenny! If you're out there, sometimes he's out there. Sometimes he never responds. I played him at my new happy birthday. I played him my new happy birthday. Yeah, so that's what came out badly. It's my new version. I'm working on it. On my piano, I'm talking about. On my piano. So, all right, folks, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. If anybody has any other tips or tricks or any stories you want me to tell you, next time I will be more than happy to do that. Molly, maybe what we do for Multifamily Law School, I keep saying law library, Multifamily Law School next time, and remind me, Molly, is I'm going to tell you about the first couple of properties I purchased and how I did it. But also, hey, folks, I've got a webinar coming up. My partner and I, and all of my partners, we put together, we finally got it. Thanks, Jim. We finally, we're raising the funds to close on a hotel conversion in Louisville. This is a phenomenal deal. Make sure you look for our webinar. We're going to be talking about how you can get involved. If any of you are interested in getting involved in the deal, that would be great. It's not a heavy lift. It's not going to be a big raise. So we're going to close it very quickly. We've already raised close to $2 million. We only need about $3 million to get the deal done. So we're just looking for a few more investors who are looking for that. Make sure you watch for my emails to register for the webinar that we have, so you can learn all about that. It'll be a great time. That's with my partner, David Peters, the Mr. Hotel Conversion himself, as told by CNBC. He's a brilliant investor, and I'm very fortunate to be working with him on this deal. And you can find out more about it, and we'll do it, probably next Tuesday, just about this time. So maybe, you know, if you're watching this, you can jump on over to the webinar when we get it to run. So, all right, everybody. Thanks, Layla. I appreciate it. And I will talk to you all soon, folks.